Thank you for joining us for episode 3 of Rhino's Horn, the podcast where we interview Canadian comedians and politicians. My guest this week is Canadian comedian Sandra Battaglini. Sandra is not only very funny, but she's also in charge of the Canadian Association of StandUp Comedians, also known as CASC. We talk about a number of things, like some of the challenges that CASC faces now during COVID, the emergency relief fund that they've put together to support comedians during this time, and what lessons comedy can learn from the Canadian music industry. We had some technical difficulties off the top, so we jump right in. Thank you for joining us, and please enjoy. I wanted to ask you about the Canadian Association of StandUp Comedians and how COVID has kind of affected the direction of that.
In terms of like what it's done for, the pandemic, it was just like, oh my God, like it obviously shifted everything. I mean, we really are at the most crucial moment in our lobbying efforts because, you saw how the government just announced the arts and culture stimulus and we're not included. We're not even mentioned. I mean, and so and not having been included in, that stuff now is really starting to show.
Yeah.
It's just revealing how detrimental it is. And it's not that people in government don't want to help us. Julia DeBrusen reached out. I mean, I've been speaking to her every now and again, but like we had like a meeting, like a venue for venues. And so we had a meeting for venues, and she was like, what they're looking at right now is the recovery stage. So when you look at comedy venues, you're like, well, how are these places going to survive? How are they going to be able to operate? And how can we get comedy venues at the same level as a theater? They are cultural venues. So,
Now, was there any talk about why comedians weren't included in that?
Well, because the stimulus money was going to existing channels. So that's what we've been speaking to the Department of Heritage on a number of occasions. But so then what CANCOM did, the foundation that we
Right. Yes, I saw that. I heard about that.
Yeah. So CANCOM then, when we learned that, when we heard the first announcement of $500 million to the sector, we asked for $1.5 million of those dollars to be distributed immediately to comedians while they create in isolation. So then we had a call with them, and they were like, we don't want to get your hopes up, but this money is going to go to existing channels, meaning it'll go to the Canada Arts Council. It's divided between the Canada Arts Council, sports sector, the Canada Arts Presentation Fund, which is where festivals get their funding from, Just for Laughs. So that doesn't mean though what we've been told is that we won't be included, but we haven't been, and it's like not even to be mentioned. So it's hard to tell. It's just that that's what's going on right now. It's stimulus to existing industries. You know what I mean? Like when you see across the board where they're giving money out, it's to obviously existing. I mean, not that we're not an existing industry, but we haven't received any stimulus before. So now we're amping up our campaigns for that recognition.
Right. So Can you explain the CANCOM thing?
Yeah, it's a not-for-profit foundation. And basically it's going to operate much like the Factor Grant. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Factor Grant in music, but we created the foundation. This was something that we thought about early on, was that we'll never, like, not to say we'll never get acknowledged by the Canada Arts Council, because I think eventually we'll be able to get involved, because, if we put as much pressure, we should be able to see some movement. But really what we need is a fund for comedians. So this fund would operate like, it would have like a board of directors, and each seat would cost a certain amount of money. So like, let's say, there's 10 seats, each seat would cost $100,000, and there'd be like $1 million of fund. So the fund would, look for money from multiple sources, and then comedians would apply for like web series, touring, album creation, pilot scripts, all that kind of stuff. And and like when you look at the music, industry, you're like, I mean, music has the most money in our country. They have multiple funds, but this is what we need, because that will start to build an actual infrastructure. Because when you see everywhere it's eroded, every place where we where comedy is being created is been eroded. You know, when you look at the broadcast landscape, that's what I mean. At the end of last year, I mean, it was horrifying. Every other week, it was like a broadcaster was asking to lower their Canadian content requirements or to defer their spend on Canadian content. The CBC applied for a lowering of Canadian content, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. So,
Wow.
you know, that's really problematic. And especially what we also need, you know, and I'm not all about just getting government funding, because CANCOM wouldn't just get money from the government. It would be like both, you know, the government would match, but the board seats would be to a lot of people in the industry. You know, we would be going after, but we've had a lot of, you know, interest already, you know, verbal commitments from some people, but we just actually sent a letter to the Ontario Minister of Heritage because we, you know, we'd heard that they were looking for, to help to give money to comedians.
Wow.
So we're like, okay, well, we'll send an email to the Minister of Heritage. There we asked for a $500,000 for CANCOM.
Right.
So, I mean, I really see this fund to grow. Like I see it to growing to $100 million. That's what I see.
Awesome.
And then that's when we start to see things change. You know, obviously that's a big thing to pull off the ground. And I sit on the board of CANCOM as well. So, yeah, to us, that is like one of the best ways to start to build an infrastructure because of all of the erosion of the traditional comedy stakeholders. I mean, when you really look at it, CBC is the only one really making comedy content. Bell made, you know, one comedy last year. Rogers doesn't make any comedy.
Yeah.
And, you know, from some of the research that I've been doing, you know, once NBC comes into our landscape, Rogers and Bell might be over. So what we need also, because what we want with CANCOM is that comedians can create exceptional content so that it's ready for the market. We want to be able to, you know, create access to other, the streamers, you know, that's the future, to Netflix, to Amazon, to Apple, to all of these places. Now, you know, I know that they are all American, but you know, in a lot of their business strategies, it's about creating international, like, content from all over the world.
Yeah.
So, and I believe though the government needs to, you know, really up the funding for the CBC, and really force the broadcasters to make Canadian content instead of buying American content. Once the like people like NBC come into this space, why would CTV and Rogers buying American content for? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's here. And that's been our problem. I mean, to me, America is our biggest issue. I mean, on every level.
Sure.
But it's totally damaged. Like, you know, I say this, like, they fucked us hard. Like, I just read this book called The Tangled Garden. I recommend it for everybody, but you're just like, this book is unreal. Just the multiple times in which Canada tried to get policies off the ground, or, you know, certain things. And America's like, oh, no, you don't. And they don't do it. They don't just do it to us. They do it to people all over the world. I mean, Korea tried to, like, raise their Canadian content requirements.
Which would have been great. Yeah.
I know. And America's like, no, you can't do that. They always kind of take that a route around being on top and monopolizing, because there's all these countries that have gotten together to say, well, we need to create tax, like, we got to tax this stuff for our own countries, right? There has to be taxes put on these over the top services. And, you know, and France did that. And then Netflix is like, and the Americans were like, you guys are discriminating against an American company, so now we're going to penalize you. So it's kind of like you never really win. I know you were saying what else with, you know, what did the pandemic do for CASC? I mean, we started that emergency relief fund. That was a big thing.
Yeah,
it was something, it was a big thing to take on, but it was like, I was like, we have to do something like this. Plus, because we were being asked to do, like, where can we donate to comedians? And so, you know, we've raised so far, I don't know where it's at, but like, the last I looked at, it was over 30,000. Wow. We've just given out a whole bunch of money to comics. Like, it's so wonderful. I mean, this is the first time, you know, in history that there's ever been any kind of support like this.
Sure.
You know, yeah. So, because that was the other thing that this crisis revealed, was the gap, that there is no support for, comedians in crisis.
Yeah, for sure. And now, did you find a lot of people applying? Were there a lot
Oh
of people?
yeah.
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 Wow.
We drew lotteries, but so, there's no, there is no end date. We've set a goal of $50,000. We'll just keep it running.
Sure.
More and more people want to, they do events, they've, direct it towards the fund.
Yeah.
So it's just meant to, if people need it, they apply, we run a lottery. And people it just feels really good that that's something we were able to do. That's really the point. That's what we're supposed to do in a time like this.
Sure. COVID highlighted it, but there's probably a lot of comedians that could have used some support before COVID happened.
Oh, geez. So many people.
Yeah.
All the time. Like, there's this one comic I remember, he's an older guy, and he started a GoFundMe because he couldn't pay his bills. And it's like, that's the life of a comedian in Canada.
Yeah.
We basically, like, we've also been talking with SOCAN. You're familiar with SOCAN, right? So they're so supportive, and they're going to be helping us to, and, work on, ensuring that we start to collect copyright and all of this stuff. Like, it's really amazing that obviously all of the support that we get from a lot of people in, sort of peripheral industries, especially music, has been our biggest ally.
Right.
And when we told them, like, we had like a session where we just, they had questions for us. There was a guy from LA, 2 people from Canada who work for SOCAN. And when they started asking us questions, they were just floored at the status of comedy in Canada. They're like, this is music in Canada in the 60s. So it's like, that's 60 years ago.
Oh
this is where we are. And that's the truth of it. And we are 60 years behind.
And so what do you think the difference is between comedy and music that allowed that disparity to take place? Do you know?
Well, I think it was just that musicians did what we did 60 years ago. Right. There was no, it was just people, lobbying on music's behalf. Nobody did that for comedy, and just probably didn't even think about it. And like, when I've expressed this to you guys before, that, it was when we started talking that we all realized, oh, nobody knows what's going on in our industry. Right. Nobody understands it. So I think that's really just the disparity, was just no awareness, and now here we are in our 3rd year. Well, we're approaching the 3rd year, and, we're at that point where it's like, oh, okay, we've built awareness. And now the big thing that I was really wanting to work on and gear us towards was, the association needs money to operate. We need to hire, we spoke about this as well. We need to hire like an executive director. And we need to have, marketing people on retainer, PR people on retainer, and a lawyer. And, and I believe that'll happen, but that's really the big thing that's one of the big things, is just that this association is just running on its own. Yeah. And that people are paid to do the work, because we're operating like a big association. You know what I mean? A funded, union or association. We're operating, but we don't have the resources. And it's like, it was too hard. It's been really, hard.
Yeah, it's tough to attract professional help without
money.
Without money, yeah.
But I think we're there. It's all good. Like, I mean, it's hard to say, then we're in this crisis, and you're like, oh, there's a whole other level of business that's tough. Like, when I said, the venue stuff started to, come up, I was like, holy shit, this is another part of the lobbying that is really significant, because, we started a task force with Gary Wright out in the Comedy Bar, and he also is a producer at Second City, and Tyler Schultz at Rumors. And, Tyler in Winnipeg, his issue is that he's isolated. And so when he has to start booking people, where's he going to get his comics from? He gets a lot of them from the US, but let's change that also. He wants to change that. And so he has to get people to fly in for accommodation. So, to get all that going, he needs the support. So, there's obviously different issues all over the country.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, with the border closed, who knows how long it's going to stay closed? So they're not even going to have an option,
And I'm happy. I'm fine with that. I don't want, especially because it's like plague.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Central.
It's interesting that I think America's credibility has been going down, certainly during this crisis.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll play a factor in how much we're willing to let them push us around.
Yeah, I think we're already doing it, you know, and I think when it comes to culture and what we do, I think Canadians are starving for their own stories. And I know that the government is like, that's such a huge priority. We just have to, for us, just keep pushing them. I mean, the Canada Arts Council told a reporter that the ball was in our court. That was in CASC's court, because they were saying, they sent out a memo encouraging comedians to apply and encouraging us to get, like, to have peer assessors. But we still run into the same problem when you want to define yourself on that pull down menu. Like, I tried the other day, I'm like, you know what, they launched like a digital creations fund.
Right.
Our initiative just the other day I saw. And then I click on like media arts or inter arts. And then it's just like this whole, you know, this box comes up and it's like, you have to do this and this has to be. And I'm like, this does not speak to us. It shuts us out right off the top, right off the bat. Right. And I don't know what ball is in our court. What's the ball?
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the ball?
And what is it, a game? Is it a competition? Are we adversaries in this? You know, like.
Yeah, exactly.
What else you've been doing? I see you're doing a political broadcast.
Yeah.
Soft left. So what's that all about?
Well, when all this, you know, started happening, and, you know, first several weeks, like, was so stressful with CASC, because we were having to talk to the, you know, ministers, the heritage department. They asked us to put together like a, you know, an income impact, like income loss impact or an economic loss impact, which was very cursory because we don't have that data. So, you know, it was stressful. And then I'm like looking at everyone, I'm like, people are creating, and I'm like, I want to do that too. And then, you know, I did like one or two shows like stand up, and I was like, I don't like this. Yeah. This does not work. And I was like, what's gonna work? And then, you know, this is something that myself and the filmmaker who made the documentary, Matt Kelly, had spoken about. You know, like the next steps would be to like do something like this, like, you know, like a video podcast. So anyways, that was like, I was like, that's something to do. And, you know, I just wanted to talk. I just wanted to have a place where I could talk to people. And that's how that came up. And plus the forum works. It's like, we're just talking, you know, and I'm really excited. Like, we're in our 4th episode tonight. I'm just really thrilled, like, 'cause the possibilities of where it could go is, you know, is right now there's like a panel of 5 of us. So okay. Every week we just discuss, like, each person like has something they want to discuss. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we're going to, like, we may like add another night, or, you know, like, I'd like to bring other like comics on every week, like, you know, guest, just to be there. And, you know, but yeah, it's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
I don't know if you heard James Mullinger. Apparently he's doing a show in a theater, but it's going to be Zoom like audience on massive screens.
Oh, wow.
And he's going to do a special or show. Wow. I'm like, that's pretty interesting. No one's going to be in the audience. And I mean, you know, in the future, that could be something that like could work in tandem with, you know, social distancing shows, right, where people are watching from, you know, remotely.
Yeah. Yeah. Who knows?
I don't know.
Yeah.
But this does not replace being in front of people.
No. It's
really kind of messed up at times. You're just like, this is just dumb. Not this, because this is nice to talk. Right. But if you and I were talking like in person, it would be nicer.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, comedy, it's a tough thing to try and do like that. Like stand-up, it doesn't really work.
No.
I saw, what's the club in Edmonton called? Anyway.
The comic strip.
Yeah, they've opened up, I think, or they're opening this weekend at 30% capacity.
I thought they opened last weekend.
Maybe it could be. It could be. I mean,
apparently they're sold out. Like, I know people are going to want to go. Like, some part of me is like on the fence of that we could be doing shows in the summer. I don't know. There's a possibility if Edmonton's, but Ontario has been so conservative, no pun intended. But been amazing. Like Doug Ford's been amazing. It's like, who would have thought? You know,
I know.
How great is he?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
I love it. It's really wonderful. Even though, you know, the health, the when it comes to like the health crisis, the reason why it was a big crisis was because of some of their measures. But you know, it doesn't matter. Like, forgive, like they're doing amazing.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, it's possible we might be doing shows in the summer, but again, you know, doing things too quickly are not going to be great. So a lot of people like you know, there's a lot of people I know that are like, not till the new year will things go back.
Right.
Back. There's no back.
Yeah, it's crazy too. You were saying conservatives. It's interesting how this is the first time in my life, I think, that I've ever seen an issue be taken seriously by well, in Canada anyway, across party lines, you know.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
It was really amazing to watch. Like, and then when it started to get, when Andrew Scheer, like, they started to get partisan, and even the NDP to some degree, and like just the way they talk to each other, it's like, this is not the time. Like, how could, I know that I'm not saying that the Liberals shouldn't be criticized, that there shouldn't be, but it's like, they just did this massive thing. Like, how about we just congratulate them? Because to me, that old style, that the style that we're operating now, it's dying. It's dead. Like, it's going to die because, you know, it just doesn't work.
No,
it doesn't work because what do you have? A new government comes in, they make new changes, they throw out the old ones, they waste money. It shouldn't be like that. We are the government.
Yeah.
And that's what I loved. Like Julie DeBruce, and you're just like, yeah, this is what the Green New Economy, the Green New Deal talks about. You know, it's like, you know, countries are just, you know, boundaries for, you know, rich men and the Queen to collect money.
Right. Yeah.
That's it. So why, you know, I think that those things will change because the government will start to become more local, and, you know, and this is what happened in this, which was really quite amazing to see.
The other thing I wanted to ask you about, I noticed for the soft left, you have the hammer and the sickle in the, which I find interesting because I haven't heard anyone else talking about communism or anything like that. My grandfather actually was a member of the Communist Party back in the day. So I've always been kind of fascinated with the idea of communism in North America. So I'm just curious why you had that included in the imagery.
So the name itself comes from this. When this idea was starting to formulate, like I had approached you know, a couple of comics, and like we were talking, and I was like, one of the comics was like, you know, the show will be about talk about unfettered capitalism. So I'm like, let's call it Unfettered. But then when I went home and did a search, some guys got a podcast called Unfettered. And then I was like, oh my God. So when people come to my house and ask, they ask where the bathroom is, I'm like, it's up the stairs, take a soft left, because there's no hallway.
Oh.
And so this one night when I had people over, Candace and Phil, who were on the show, you know, I told them that, and like Candace was like, oh my God. So it became like a sort of inside joke. And then when, you know, this was happening, I'm like, oh, soft left makes sense. And so, you know, and then the imaging part of it, it's like, well, what is the representation of this? And that seemed to work because it is softer. You know, it's not the red and the black of the, you know, of what communism, those usually those colors.
Right.
But yeah, no, like listen, when I first got introduced to Karl Marx and communism, I was like, this is it. This is the thing. You know, this was years ago.
Right.
And then, you know, when I was doing my master's, and where I did it on women who worked at INCO during World War II, you know, World War II was when the mine mill union was organizing. So I had interviewed people who were secretly organizing for the union at the time. And then after the war, the mine mill, there was like a company union, and then, you know, mine mill union, which, you know, really is in so many ways, like it's obviously a workers' communist union. And Sudbury was probably the scene of some of the most violent interactions between workers and the company. And, you know, I remember being in the, you know, going through the Marxist Party of Canada, the Communist Party of Canada, like their membership list, like in Sudbury.
Really? So
that was just always really interesting to me. And because it was like, because of the nature of mining, hard rock mining, it was just like, yeah, that's, you know, it was like, here's a company that had been around for what, I guess since the mid 1860s, 1870s. And, you know, it was an American company, and, you know, they really took advantage of, like, the working conditions were horrible. And then here comes the war, and shit starts to change. And, then workers from this one mine become some of the best paid workers in the world.
Yeah, collective bargaining and unions, I think, is so important. I hear AOC down in the States talking about socialism and unions and organizing in your communities and stuff. And I'm like, to hear an American politician talk about that, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's like the explosion in the labor movement is just right now. It's just the tip of the iceberg, because people are not going to put up with shit anymore. It doesn't make any sense, I mean, Bernie. But that's the thing, though. It's like, you're right. To hear an American politician talk like that, Bernie's been talking like that forever, and then he has to drop out of the race. So weird.
Yeah, it's shady.
Fucked up. It's not good. I don't know if there's this. I should send this to you if I remember. But it was like this Bulgarian. I guess she's like a psychic who predicted what would happen, and that now America's like, as we move forward, they're not gonna. They can't operate this way anymore. So all of the internet, like all of their foreign policy will change. I mean, and like a lot of people, I feel like there's a civil war about to break out, if it hasn't broken out already. Yeah. And the country's going to divide. It's not going to be, it can't operate the way they are. Like the country is going to separate. Mm-hmm.
I find it interesting, we're talking about communism, socialism, and all that stuff. It's interesting that to help people, they had no problem writing checks, both the American and the Canadian government.
I know.
Send everybody money. It's like, well,
exactly.
Wait, what do you?
If this money was here now, then what the fuck were you guys doing before?
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like, we need a guaranteed basic income, and I believe it's going to happen.
I agree.
I was talking to people from the theater center, and it's like, if we had a guaranteed basic income, like as artists, then we wouldn't have to, like she said, she goes, we wouldn't have to, perform for our money, or beg for our money or whatever, do tricks for our money. And it's like, why do we always have to defend what we do for that? It's like, no, keep a guaranteed basic income, which Germany is doing, because if we had a guaranteed basic income when all this happened, it would have been way less stressful for everybody.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Sandra. I feel like I've taken up enough of your time there, but it's great to talk to you.
It's great to talk to you too.
Yeah, it was nice to see you, and hopefully we can get out into the world and give each other a hug.
Yeah, I really look forward to that.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Okay, thanks again, Sandra, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, sounds amazing.
Okay.
Ciao.
Bye. Thank you for tuning in to Rhino's Horn. If you'd like to follow us on social media, on Instagram, we are Rhino's Horn. On YouTube, we are Rhino's Horn. On Facebook, we are Rhino's Horn. And on Twitter, we are @HornyVoter. Please join us next week. My guest will be Member of Parliament for Toronto Danforth and Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage, Julie DeBrusen. We have an excellent chat about some of the challenges that Parliament faces now during COVID, and much, much more. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next week.